Hi, this is Martin from Imagineer Systems. Today we're going to be looking at 2D to 3D stereo conversion using Mocha Pro, After Effects, and a great product from Metal called Freeform Pro. We'll use Mocha Pro for the roto and the clean plating needed for the background, and then we'll use Freeform Pro inside After Effects to do the displacement in 3D so we can get the two eyes and render out the conversion. The downside to a lot of stereo conversion is the amount of roto that you have to get done. And this is where Mocha really comes in handy, because we can track areas in the scene and then link roto to that track. We can get the work done a lot quicker. You can see here we've done some roto already, but I'm going to show you a few of the techniques to actually link that roto before we move on to the next part. So, first of all, I want to be able to do the same what I've done here. So I've got this nice little bit of depth roto set up for this doorway here, and I'm just going to add a new bit down here. So what we can do is I'm going to come back to where we can see it fully, and I'm just going to track a little bit of the section up here. So I'm just going to take this area like so, and I'm going to call this something useful like door track. Now at the moment the layer is generated above everything, so I'm going to drag that down below all of my body objects that I've got here. You can see we've got a roto body, an arm, and so forth on this gentleman here with the hat. So I'm going to track this area. I'm going to use perspective, and let's just track it forwards. Now because it's underneath all of this, it'll be ignored when he walks in front of it. So it'll still track this area, but these areas won't be affected by the masked parts of his body. So once we've got this tracked, we can now turn this off. We don't need it anymore. So the door track is now hidden. And I'm going to go back to the start of the shot and zoom in here and then draw a roto around this area here. So I'm going to take my X-spline tool again and just quickly do a nice tight roto. We can fall right off the edge of the screen here since we don't see that part, and again I'm going to come up here, do some more roto around the edge like so. I'm just going to smooth it off a little bit and tighten up those corners. We can check our matte. I'm going to turn off my splines for a second so I can just quickly check my matte. And I'll turn off the tangents as well so we can zoom in here. And I'm just going to make sure that that is clean. Again, we can tighten up this edge here. And that's about right. So let's just turn my splines back on. So now once we've got this, obviously it's at the moment sitting there not doing anything. So what we need to do now is link this to the track that we've just done. So I'm going to call this door roto 2, and again I'm going to put it below in the scene. We've got it inside here, so we better keep that consistent. Let's call this inside 2. And now I'm going to link that to the door track that I've just done, like so. And now when we play it back, you can see that will actually follow along, and we won't need to actually do any animation on that area. So I'm just going to turn that matte off. So now when we play back, you can see that that's flowing along with the rest of the track. Now this isn't the only way to do it. We can also just track and then modify the spline that we've tracked with. So over here we've got this foreground object where he's probably tied off his horse. So I'm going to actually now draw a tighter roto around this one and then refine it after I've done the track. So I'm just going to quickly do a quick roto around this. Like so. And again we can be rough around here because it's off the screen. I'm also going to smooth it off a little bit because it's a nice rounded organic object. Now I haven't linked this to a track because at the moment because it's in the foreground and I need to track it on its own. So I'm going to do that. We probably don't need perspective here, but I'm going to turn it on anyway. And let's track forwards. And you can see it's gone off the screen here, so we can probably have stopped it there. So I'm going to find where it's started to. I've got to track backwards one frame as well, because I started on the first frame, like so. So it's following along, and then we get to a certain point and it falls off the screen. So I'm going to just take that and on the next frame just animate it off screen, and then that can sit off on the edge there. Now you can see the mistake I've made here is that because I've created a key, it's actually dragged from one to the other. So I need to come back to where it first goes off and then move that back to where it's supposed to be. Otherwise it won't be, it'll tween between the two keyframes where I created it and where I took it off. So I've just put that back, and now that will go along with the track. So I've had to only create one extra keyframe to animate that through. So that will actually track in quite nicely, and I'll just adjust a little bit there where we can see that edge. Again, you can see it just a little bit coming through here where it's distorted a bit. So, once we've got those, we've added these two new shapes, we can now take this information and then export the mask data to After Effects. So let's do that now. I think I'm just going to rename my front layer here. I'm just going to call this Post, and this is in front of everything else. So we can see here that we've tried to set up the roto top to bottom in terms of what is closest to the camera. Now I think this post is the closest to the camera, which is what we've just rotoed and tracked down here. And then we've got the body of the guy, and then his arm, and so on and so forth down the list. So, likely enough, these ones where the door are actually down the bottom, inside one and inside two. So, and we've turned off our tracks. In fact, I'm going to take this door track and also move that down to the bottom, just to keep it consistent with the rest. And we'll lock that off. So, once we've got these, we can now export all of this out to After Effects, and they'll come in as masks in the same order. So I'll just export my shape data. Now in Pro we've got a lot of options here, but we're going to use Mocha Shape Data for AE, and I'm going to choose all visible layers. This is why I've turned the visibility of my tracks off, because we don't want the tracks to come in with the shape data. So I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard, and now we can move across to After Effects. So here we are in After Effects. So I've already set up my piece of footage ready to go. Now we're going to be using this roto to actually use displacement to push this man and the elements in the scene out in 3D, so then we can use cameras to see the left and right eye. So first of all we need to create that displacement. So I've got my footage layer here, and we're going to leave that alone for now, and I'm going to create a new solid, and let's make it a pure white solid just for consistency, and I'm going to call this one Displace Man, because we're going to work on displacing the man first. So we'll click OK on that one, and then what we want to do is come up to Edit and paste Mocha Mask. We don't want to click Control or Command V to paste, because that will paste the shape effect. In this case we're going to be using the mask that's available in CS5 and CS 5.5. So I'm just going to paste the Mocha Mask, and then all of our masks come in. So once we've got this, we want to pre-compose it, because we're going to manipulate this composition and duplicate it a few times. So I'm just going to do Command-Shift-C to pre-compose. I'm just going to call it the same as the layer, Displace Man. And very importantly, we need to move all attributes into the new composition. And then we want to open the new composition. So I'm going to click OK. So now we have, if we press M on our layer in our new composition, we can see all the masks with all their animation set in the layers. So at the moment, we can start using this and actually grade it and change the colors around if we want to, but it's easier if we separate these into separate layers. So rather than having to go back into Mocha and actually export out each individual layer and apply it to different ones, or press the M key and copy and paste to different layers, I've actually written a script to actually do it for us. So underneath File, and we'll supply this with the tutorial, we've got scripts, and I'm going to run a script file, and we just navigate to that script, and here it's called Split Masks, and click Open. And now what it's doing is running through all of those masks and creating separate masks for each layer. What it also does is works out the order that they're in and changes the color of them accordingly in terms of being closest to the camera. So the post, which we did last, is going to be pure white, moving all the way back to the darkest areas here. Now we're going to have to do a bit of manipulation for it, but this just gives it a little bit of a start. You'll notice too there's a slight white outline everywhere. This is because our displace layer at the bottom is still on, so we can turn that one off now. That was just the one we started with. Now that we have each individual layer, we can start manipulating this to create the displacement. Now we want to keep this as a master copy because we're going to be using this a couple of times. So I'm going to go to my project and select Displace Man, and just duplicate that before I continue, because I want to make sure that I keep what is contained within this composition for use later, because we're going to get rid of a few things. So once I've duplicated that, I'm going to go back to the composition, and we're going to get rid of the background parts and just leave the man. So first of all, let's come down and I'm going to click on Post and delete that. And then I'm also going to go down to where the head finishes, that's our last in the layer, and delete all of the background, so the lamp and the insides and the tree here, and I'm going to get rid of this displacement layer at the bottom too because we don't need that. So we should just be left with our man, and we can see here because we've brought in masks, some of the ones that we've animated off are still maintaining in the layer, so we can get rid of those by finding where they are. Let's just find that layer, the right, the left, no, it's the right arm. So it stops about there. You can see it starting to fall off there, so I'm going to now just use Alt and the right square bracket key just to cut that off so it disappears from the shot. Same goes for this hand. We can see a hand floating here, so I'm going to work out where that comes in. Just about there. And we'll take that hand, which is the right hand, and again I'm going to do Alt left bracket to cut it this way, and then that will disappear on that side. So we've got our animated roto now. Now at the moment the colours are a little bit off, so I'm going to just move a few things around here. So what the script does is that creates a fill on that layer. So I'm going to brighten this one up a little bit on this side, and I'm going to darken the body down just a tad. And this arm is actually in front of the body, so let's pull that up over the top. And because this arm's over on the back, the right arm, I'm also going to darken that one down a little bit. Basically we're trying to keep what's light closest to the camera and what is dark further away. So that's a little bit better there. We also want to soften this a little bit just to keep the edges just falling off a little bit. So I'm going to again get rid of these areas here. This layer at the top, which is also created by the script, is a layer control system to control the feather on each of your masks. So let's get rid of the post as well. And I'm just going to feather off the body just a little bit. And let's do the same for the arm. And the forearm. And where's the right hand there? Just a little bit. And the left hand a little bit, and finally the head just a little bit. So we get this nice little fall off for the character. We can see the legs coming in here too, so we should also soften them just slightly. And that will just give an edge to the roto. So now we have this one, we can set up the other layers. I'm going to go back to my project now, and we've got our duplicate here. I'm going to call this one displace post. And once again I'm going to duplicate it so I don't lose any of the information. So let's double click on our displace post and we've got all the information that we saved before from duplicating it. But this time we want to get rid of the other bits of information that we've just done. So we want to get rid of the body. So I'm going to just select all those and get rid of him. And I'm also going to get rid of the background for now because we're going to do that again on a separate layer. So just get rid of the chimney and the insides. So now we've got these foreground elements. And actually I'm going to actually make this post one also separate. So let's just focus on the lamp post. So again, we've got these areas which are a little bit further forward, so I'm going to just boost up their color just a little bit. And I'm also going to, again, let's just delete the bits that don't matter here. Only very subtly, because the lamp is quite hard edge, so I'm only softening a little bit, but the tree is quite rounded, so I'm going to blur that out quite significantly. So that's our displace post. Now we want to focus on those background elements, so I'm going to again come back to my displace post, and I'm going to call this displace background. And once again I'm going to duplicate that, just so we can keep the details, and let's open displace background. And we go through the same procedure again, so I'm just going to select everything so far that I've done and delete that. So we're just left with these background elements. Now this one's a little bit different. What we want to do is, because this area is black, it's actually cut out of the scene, we need to create a background plate to make sure that it pushes to a certain level. So for this I'm going to create a new solid, and we'll make it a darkish grey. Okay, and I'm going to put it behind all of those things. Now it's a little bit too light at the moment, so I'm just going to change that. Let's go back up, and I'm going to make it darker than the chimney but lighter than this inside, because we want this to push backwards. So, okay, now the insides we can just make pure black, so I'm going to come back to the insides, make that black, and also make this one black. So now this background will work for the wood paneling on our footage. We can see here this wood paneling here. I'm going to turn off my display so you can see. So that full matte grey solid will help with these areas, and then we'll have a lighter grey to push this chimney forwards and a black to push these ones back. Like so. So finally we just got to do one more, which is that post. So let's do that one now. So we come over to our final one here, and I'm going to just duplicate it again in case we need it, and I'm going to call this one just displace template, just in case we need it later, and I'll rename this one here displace stable post. So we'll go into that one. Now this one's easy because it's just this one over here, so we're just going to delete all the others, and because again it's a rounded object, I'm going to take that post and just blur it out quite significantly there, and we can delete those other feathered things from the script. So what we have now is a whole breakdown of different displacement objects. So we've got this displace post, just so we don't confuse those, I'm going to call this displace lamp post. We've got a background. Let's bring them all in. So we've got a background, our lamp post, our stable post, and our man, which is already in the scene. So if we were to look at these, I'm just going to turn off the saloon footage layer so you can see. So we've built up this scene of foreground objects and background objects that will be used to displace the footage when we start to cut them out. So we've got our post up the front here, we've got the man, we've got the lamp post out the front here, and we've got the background. So all this builds up a tapestry to actually push out objects when we start using the Freeform plugin. Up to this point, all of this stuff could actually be done inside Mocha AE, or if you wanted to really do some work for yourself, you could even use the masks inside After Effects. However, there's one more step that we want to do inside Mocha to actually help make the 3D look more convincing, and for that we need Mocha Pro. Back inside Pro, you can see here the rotor that we did before. Now, it's great to actually separate all these objects so we can use it for displacement or cutting them out and so forth. However, it comes to a problem when you're actually pushing out 3D, where an organic object like this man here will have a rounded edge and look like he's bleeding into the background. And this looks really distracting when you're doing 3D conversion. So what you need to do is actually create a clean plate which removes him out of the scene to give you as much background behind him as possible, especially when someone is so forward that you're going to be able to see around him in the left and right cameras. So we can do that in Mocha Pro by doing a removal module clean plate. I'll open a recent file that I've done for the remove. Now, we've shown this one before in another example, but I'm going to go over it briefly just so you understand the concept. We have a tracked area of background, so if I move this forward you can see that this tracks along with the background. And we have a mask around the foreground object that we want to remove. Then inside Mocha Pro we have the removal module, which calculates according to what's in the foreground and what's been tracked in the background. Now, in this particular instance, because he covers a certain area that the program can't see and remove, we've also generated a clean plate, if I show you that. So we've generated a clean plate on frame 1 to assist the removal through the rest of the shot. You can see we don't have any other clean plates here, it's not rendered. It's just one clean plate to help clear out the rest of the shot. So with that said, let's just quickly do that now. So I'm just setting it to none, and we're going to search through all the frames and use our imported clean plate. So we'll just go through that and start taking him out and cleaning out the shot. Once the clean plate's done, you can see he's been removed out of the shot, and we've just got the background information based on the clean plate that we created and the removal module checking through the rest of the frames to get rid of him. So then we can actually render this out by going to Export Rendered Clip, take that removal clip and render it out to a JPEG sequence, which is what I've already done. So I'm just going to cancel that and bring that into After Effects. Back inside After Effects, I'm just going to double click and get my remove render that I did and open it up. Now it automatically interprets it to whatever you've got it set, so I've got to set this back to 24 frames rather than 30. And let's bring that in. So you can see there the difference. I've got the man in one and the removed man in the other. So we can now start using this removed plate to help drive the rest of the background where we're not using the man. Right, so here's where the fun begins. We're going to start actually using these displacement maps now to push our objects out into 3D space. So first of all, let's concentrate on the man. So we've got our saloon footage selected. I'm actually just going to call this one Saloon Man. And now we're going to apply a freeform effect to it. So rather than use the Freeform plugin that comes with After Effects CS5, I'm actually going to use its bigger brother from Metal called Freeform Pro. This is a lot faster and has a lot more features. So let's pull this in. And we're going to be using the displacement mapping setting, which is why we've generated all these displacement maps. First of all, I'm going to come down to Grid and Control Colors and get rid of the display so that we don't see that there. I'm now going to go to the displacement mapping, and we're going to choose our displace layer, which in this case is going to be the displace man. Now you can just see a subtle push that's just happened there. If I turn off the effect, we can push and pull him out, and you can see him starting to push out in 3D space. So if you want to see this more clearly, we can go to the camera view and actually look at the top down. We can also use the alpha as a mask, which we want to do here, so I'm going to use alpha as a mask to cut him out of the scene. And the next thing we need to do is create a camera so we can actually see this going in 3D properly. I'm just going to do new camera, and I'm going to call this camera left because we're going to be creating a new camera later. So let's just go OK. So we've got our new camera now. Now coming back to Saloon Man, I'm just going to come to the active camera and look at the top. So here we're looking top down on what we've just created, and you can see the very subtle push that's just happened in the 3D. If I turned off the effect, it would disappear because it becomes a zero depth flat 2D layer. So I'll turn that back on and we can see the 3D start to come out. Now it's a little bit low at the moment, so I'm going to come to the displace height and change that to about 50. And that pushes him out a little bit further. So we're getting a more man-sized shape now. So let's just go back to the active camera. And again, if we turn that effect off, we can see, let's pull off the alpha for a second, we can see how he's pushing out a little bit in 3D space. So let's just turn that alpha mask back on, and we can start generating the other layers. For everything else, we're going to be using the removed plate layer. So for the time being, I'm just going to turn my Saloon Man off, and let's turn on the remove layer. I'm going to rename this one just background because we're going to be just doing a foreground man and a background here, so let's just call this BGD. And then we're going to combine each of our displacements for the background into one composition. So I'm just going to press Command-Shift-C, and that brings up our pre-compose box, and I'm just going to pre-compose that as background displace. So we'll just move all those attributes into the new composition and we'll click OK. So now we've got a background displace and we've got a displace man. Now the reason we've done this and actually split these out is so that we've got a little bit of further control. So if you do want to add extra layers, you can. But for this example, we're just going to do a simple one. So that's why we've composed them into just one composition for the displacement. So next I'm just going to come back to Saloon Man and I'm going to copy that effect and just paste it down onto the background layer. So we'll just do Command V, and you will see this displacement actually come up with the man. And then once we've got that, we can just change it to the background displace layer instead. Now because we've got a massive flat layer here, we don't need to use an alpha as mask, so I'm just going to turn that off. And now this will actually be pushed out. So if we just turn off that effect again, you'll be able to see that push happening in the shot here. It's quite a significant push there, so we can tweak that if we want to, but this is working quite well for our needs. Again, if we want to actually preview that, we can actually come down to our top view and we can see that push happening in the shot here. So let's just go back to our active camera, and now we can turn on our Saloon Man as well, and now we've got two compiled layers. And again, I'll go back to the top view and we can see him now sitting in front of our projected layer. Now that we've set up our 3D projection, we can go ahead and work on creating the second eye for our 3D conversion. So what we want to do here is actually duplicate the left camera, so just Command or Control D, and I'm just going to rename this one camera right. And what we want to do with this camera is now move it slightly to the right to generate that parallax. Before we move it over, I'm just going to double click on both my cameras and make sure I change them to 2-node cameras. The reason we want to do 2-node cameras is because when you're working with 3D, you may want to actually converge the camera eyes into the scene, and this means you need to be able to rotate and control those views. So if we have a look at the top down, for example, you can see my camera selected here, and I'll just zoom out a little bit, let's say 50%. At the moment we're looking dead straight onto the scene, but eyes often don't look at a scene that way. Our eyes are obviously right next to each other in our heads, but when we're looking at objects we often look into the scene, and our eyes cross in and converge. So having a two-node camera helps us control how those eyes slightly converge in, and I'm going to do that now. While we're here though, I'm first of all going to move my man a bit forward. At the moment he's quite flat against the back of this scene, so we want to get some really nice depth in here. So I'm going to go to my Saloon Man here, and I'm going to go up to my editing 3D transform, and go to the position, and I'm going to push that forward about -50, and you'll see him push off the scene there. This means we'll get a lot more depth when we actually do our scene. In fact, just to make it extreme, I'm going to bring it out to about -80. So he's really far off there. So now when we look at our cameras, you can see how they're pushing off there. Okay, still in this view, I'm going to create a new null object. So I'm just going to rename this null. I'm just going to call it null L, and I'm going to duplicate that one and call it null R. I'm then going to parent the camera left to the null L using the pick whip here, so drag and drop, and the same with the camera right. I'm going to grab the pick whip and link that to null R. Now the reason we want to do this is to control the overall motion in the X-plane for these cameras. So if I go to my camera left, if I try and move this camera in its position, you're going to see that it's just going to rotate around that point because this is a two-node camera. And for what we want to do now is actually control the overall motion instead. So I'm going to go to my null L and press P, and then I'm going to move this back to 5 pixels, so 475, just over slightly, and you'll see that camera now has moved just slightly over to the left. And I'm going to do the same for the camera right, so I'm going to press P and make that 485. Now our cameras will be sitting just to the left and right of each other, like our eyes would be in space. So I'm just going to move back to the active camera so we can have a look at this close up. So it looks the same at the moment. I'm just going to turn off these nulls so we don't see them. If I turn off the camera now, you'll see just the left camera view and the right camera view. So we've got those two eyes, left and right. In fact, if you look just below the arm here, you can see a very subtle pixel change happening as the man covers slightly more of the background because of that left and right eye comparison. Now, if we want to converge the eyes back, we just need to change the point of interest. So if I select A on my camera right, we'll bring up the point of interest, and I've moved this camera over 5 pixels, so I just need to bring that back. So I'm going to make that -5. And the same with the camera left. I'm going to trick A on my camera left and make that 5. Now when I turn my camera right back on, you can see that rotation that's happening in the shot. If we go back to the top-down view, you can see that again. If I just turn on my camera right, select my camera right and my camera left, you'll see that shift in space. Now, whether or not you want to converge the eyes is entirely up to you. You can just keep them parallel and you will still get a good 3D effect, but depending on the scene you're working with, converging the eyes can actually be a lot better and a lot less fatiguing on the viewer. So for this example, I'm going to leave it converged. I'm going to go back to my active camera, and now we can start using the 3D's glasses effect to finally get our 3D effect going. So I'm going to turn off my camera right view, and then go up to my Saloon L in the project panel and just Command D to duplicate that layer. I'm then going to rename that Saloon R so that we now have a left and a right view. Let's just double click on Saloon R, and I'm going to turn back on that camera right, and just to be sure I'm going to turn off camera left. So now we have a composition where we have just a left camera on, and we have a composition where there's a right camera on. And if we switch between those comps, again you can see that subtle motion happening in the viewer. So once we have these two objects, we can now select both of them in the project panel and drag them into a new composition. we just leave those settings as they are and click OK. And so once again we have a left and a right. If I turn off my left, you'll see that right distortion happening in the shot. So now we can create a new solid. We just make it the same size as the composition. I'm just going to call this 3D and click OK. And then we go up to Effect and choose the 3D Glasses effect, which is under Perspective, 3D Glasses. It defaults to not having any view selected, so under the left view drop-down we just select Saloon L, and the same for the right view, we select Saloon R. And again it defaults to showing a stereo pair, but this is not what we want. We want to go down to Balanced Coloured Red-Blue. So now you can put on your 3D glasses and see the effect that's happened. If you don't have 3D glasses, it probably doesn't look like all that much has changed, but you can see a very subtle red outline moving up the side of the body here. If we just turn on our scene convergence, I'm going to make this about 5, you can see that much more severely. If you want to actually tweak the convergence, I don't recommend using scene convergence though. I would turn that back to 0. I would go actually back to the compositions and tweak the actual camera point of interest and position, so that you can get the control over the eyes that you want in the shot. So, for example, if we want to separate the eyes a little bit further, I'm just going to go back to my Saloon left, and I'm going to select my null L, and I'm going to move the position back to 470, so move it a further 5 pixels across. I will then go to my Saloon right, and do the same for the right. So I'll go to my null, and make that 490 to move it further to the right by 5 pixels. Now when we go back to the 3D composition, you can see a much more severe effect happening here. I'm just going to rename that Saloon 3D. And now if you look through the glasses, you can actually see this is much severe, and you can see the guy stepping out in front of the background much further, because those eyes are now further apart, so we can see further around the object. And here's the final result. You can see this version is quite extreme, so at any point you can go back into your left and right compositions and tweak those values using the point of interest or the null objects to move the cameras in left and right space to get the right amount of convergence that you need for your shot. So that wraps up this tutorial on 3D conversion inside After Effects. If you want to learn more about Freeform Pro, please go to Metal's site and check out their product page. As usual, if you want any new tutorials or demos on Mocha Pro and any of Imagineer's products, go to our website and check out the Learn Mocha page, or go to our videos section and check out all the tutorials available. This has been Brennand for Imagineer Systems.